I think the next section is on self-efficacy. Anybody know what that term means? Anybody in here? I didn't either till somewhat recently, but I think it really fits here in what we do. How many of you this morning are here because you answered an ad that you saw either in the newspaper or maybe on our tape somewhere? Yeah, maybe over half. Well, I did the same thing. I answered an ad one day, and it said make $1,000 to $1,200 a week easy, and it had something to do with golf courses. So I said, yeah, you know, this is sounds like a great thing. I've just gone through a bankruptcy, a business failure. It's kind of at the bottom of my ladder, and I found this ad and I answered it. And I have to tell you this little story. Anyway, I was selling golf course tee signs and bench sponsorship ads, little ads. And I did the interview in Kansas City at the airport, Charlie Cobb. And then I went to Des Moines, Iowa to be trained. And I met a gentleman there. And for the life of me, I cannot remember his last name. His first name was Dwayne. And we met at, I think it was a Hampton Inn up there, and there were 3 golf courses to sell. And this guy that was training me, he was probably in his middle 30s. His hair was thin. He had crinkly khaki pants on and tennis shoes. He had a plaid shirt, and he wore like a high school Letterman jacket. And you know, I wasn't really impressed when I first met him. Here, you know, said make $1,000 to $1,200 a week easy. He did a short interview with me over coffee in the morning. I signed the ICA agreements and the non-compete agreements. They had a presentation book, not nearly as nice as ours, and he flipped through it and he gave me a script to call on people. We had a trade out in the Hampton Inn there, so he put me in a room with a telephone. We didn't have cell phones at that time. This is, you know, 20-some years ago. But we just used the phone in the hotel to make our calls. And he said, you know, here's your script. Don't call on the automotive category, because, you know, that's what I really like to sell. Don't call on insurance salesmen or chiropractors. He had about 4 or 5 categories. He said, don't call on, but call on anything else you want. When you get a lead, come and see me. And we had to sell 7 ads, and we made 10% on the 7 ads. That's how we qualified. And if we did that, we got our own stores. Well, the guy really surprised me. I watched him in a 2-week period of time. I think there were 4 other of us training salespeople. And he sold out 3 golf courses. Well, I got my 7 in those 2 weeks, and but I watched him sell 3 golf courses, 18 ads on 3 different golf courses. One was, one was the best golf course, so it was $750, and then the middle one was $500, and then the low one was $300. And you know, if you run those numbers, he was making 30% on that. So I watched him make about $5,000 in 2 weeks. Well, now I'm impressed with the guy. But here's the key, here's the bottom line. I knew that if he could do it, gosh, I could do it. I saw this guy and I thought, you know, that's pretty doggone good money. And it took me about 6 months before I could actually get through a golf course in 2 weeks and make that $1,000 to $1,200 a week. Self-efficacy, you know, on your notes there, if you read it, self-efficacy is really how much you believe that you can do something. How much you believe that you can do something. A little story about Kevin Simhack. You know, the reason he's, you know, the president of the company now. I could send Kevin anywhere, put him on a plane, rent him a car. We usually did trade outs for hotels, but we could pay for the hotel. I could drop him anywhere in the country. He would get the store done. He would have at least 2 people hired and selling ads and pay for all the expenses and come back. Because he had that belief system. He could do it anywhere. And we have people, the leaders in this company have that. The people that are really successful at that, at this, have that inner knowing that they can get it done. Doesn't matter where you drop them, in a good store, bad store, Iowa, Alabama, Mississippi, wherever, they can get it done. And I want to call on somebody else here in the audience that has that. Many people in here have that self-efficacy, but there's one guy I want to call on this morning that also has it. His name is, come on, Ed Hoffman. Can you tell me where you get that, or how you do that, or I mean, we could just drop you anywhere, and you'll get her done.
Well, I did get fortunate enough. I was trained by Kevin. So, it's a good question. I guess part of it is somewhere along the line, and it'll be a little bit of my talk, is I believed I got blessed again. I found another good opportunity. And that helped everything just motivate me to the point that I'm all in, and have been all in from the day that I started. Because it's, bless the broken road that brought us here. We all have these stories, and mine is, this is whatever, reckless. But once in a while, the great line in that Inglourious Bastards movie, fate will shine on you. And I believe that's what happened when I met Kevin in Oklahoma City. And so, like I said, it was kind of funny. Now I'll tell that little story. I think we had 5, didn't we? We interviewed 5, or he interviewed 5. What's that?
We had only 1, but there was 5 there.
Yeah. Anyway, we went to supper the first night, and I just sat there. I was quiet as a church mouse. And, it was just like in a chicken coop, and all kinds of talk. And of course, they were all on Kevin because he was, the guy who hired everybody. But then he cut us loose. He kind of gave us a little bit of schooling and said, go out and sell. And then that Friday, he said, bring in everything so I can, turn it in and get you paid. And when he was sitting there putting his paperwork together, I showed up. I was the only guy that made it back. And I had my 4 ads. 63 calls it took. But anyway, I just decided right then that, and I told him, I said, when I met him, I said, give me something honest that I don't have to worry about. Katie barred the door. I'll give it everything I got.
Awesome, that's awesome. So, self-efficacy, and I would say just about everybody in this room has that. That's why you're here. And on to the third section of my little paper here. How do you create self-efficacy? Well, there are 3 foundations of human thinking, and it revolves around questions. Now, I know all of the great salespeople in here know the power of a great question. There is also a tremendous power in the questions that we ask ourselves. Not only the questions that we ask of someone else, but the questions that we ask ourselves. And there's 3 parts to this. The first part, when you are asked a question, when you ask yourself a question or someone else, the first thing it does is get your attention immediately. And I'll give you an example. If you were going to describe to me or to maybe the person next to you, if you were going to describe to them your car, your automobile, what's the first thing that happens? Well, first of all, you think about your car, don't you? It gets your attention. So immediately you begin to think about how you're going to answer that question. And the third thing that happens is you visualize it, don't you? You think about, and then you start to think about, well, how you're going to describe that. So the mind responds to a question, and then you begin to figure out how you're going to answer it, and then you also picture it in your mind. here's the key. There are good questions and there are bad questions. And I have them, but I found this technique to overcome them, to get me back on track when I get a case of stinking thinking or mistaken in the mind. It's a new term I heard recently, mistaken in the mind. So what are some bad questions? Well, here's one I get pretty often, because now that I'm a pilot, people will say, well, aren't you afraid that the plane's going to crash? Well, think about that. You know, there's nothing rational about that question that they ask me, because if you look at statistics, it's much safer to fly than it is to go out there and get in your automobile. What would be some other bad questions that we might ask ourselves as salespeople when we're in the field and maybe it's getting tough? Karen, do you ever get in the field and it gets tough and you say anything like, oh my gosh, what if I don't sell an ad today?
Oh, yeah.
What's another question you get out there? It's like, oh, what if they don't renew? Or, you know, gosh, I think I've seen everybody in town. There's nobody else that wants to buy. What? Those are bad questions. And, you know, we all ask ourselves those. And here's what's going on in our mind when we ask ourselves a question like, oh, what if I don't sell anything today? What's going on? It's, oh, I'm not going to be able to make my house payment. I'm not going to be able to make my car payment. Oh, I won't be able to buy food. I'm going to starve to death and die. That's really what's going on in your subconscious. So, what do you do when those things start to creep in? I get them. You know, what if nobody shows up for work today? You know, what if I lose half the sales force? You know, what if I can't pay the printing bill? So here's what you do. There's also good questions to ask yourself. And when you get in those situations where you start thinking about those bad questions, the thing to do is to begin to ask yourself some good questions. What would be some good questions? Michelle.
What if I finish my market a day early?
What if I finish my market a day early? That's a great question. Anybody else? Who else?
How can I?
How can I? How
Whatever
can
your
I?
goal is, no matter what's going on, wherever you're at, middle of the week, beginning of the week, toward the latter part of the week, ask yourself, how can I still accomplish the goal I set out this week?
How can I?